Next, we're going to get to our featured speaker, whom I am very proud to introduce. Bailey Hutchison is known most notably for her 20-year career representing Texas in the U.S. Senate. She's currently senior partner with the law firm Bracewell and Giuliani. In 1993, she was elected to the Senate in a special election. She was the first woman to represent Texas and was reelected 3 times by large margins. She served as ranking member on Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, Transportation. She also served on defense appropriations for 16 years. She's also an acclaimed author, with her most recent book, Unflinching Courage, Pioneering Women Who Shaped Texas, released in 2013. She's also a CNBC contributor. In 2013, the Dallas City Council voted to name the convention center, the Bailey Hutchison Convention Center, Dallas. She grew up in Lamarck, Texas, graduate of University of Texas and University of Texas School of Law. On a personal note, I'd also like to say that when Kay told my wife and me she was not going to run for re-election, we had mixed feelings. Mixed because she had accomplished so much for the state and country while in Washington. More importantly, she had conducted her elected role with an open mind and a level head. She represents an era in politics so desperately needed again, reaching across the aisle to forge agreements and listening to differing opinions with respect for all participants. Kay's also conducted herself with dignity and class, and while she's missed in Washington, we're sure glad to have her back here full time. Please welcome the Honorable Bailey Hutchison.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been great. What Steve didn't tell you is that we both have 12-year-olds and school together, and they're best friends. And as a matter of fact, your daughter told your wife that she went 12 years old. I went to go to SMU and room with Bailey Hutchison. So we're looking forward to that, even with my orange blood. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming today, and thank you for asking me, Steve, to talk about the future. You know, there's such a divide in our country. Steve mentioned it. I am an era past. Hopefully, this is a cycle and not an end, because I think that we need to recycle into people who can work together, especially on the big important things, and be able to craft enough of a way forward that we can function, our government and our country. But we are divided, and the divisions are deeper than I've ever seen. I've worked with President Clinton, as well as President Bush, and then President Obama. President Clinton, you could make a deal with. Most certainly President Bush you could make a deal with, because he was doing so many things that we agreed with. But President Clinton, you could work with and you could go forward. I mentioned welfare reform, which was a huge boon for our country. And President Clinton vetoed it twice. We kept working. He finally signed the bill, and it has really transformed welfare in our country. So those are the ways that we can move forward. With this administration, it's been very much more difficult because the divisions are deeper, and I would say the frustration level is especially high. Now, the biggest thing that we face, of course, every one of you in this room knows, is the debt, the $17 trillion debt. And we now have a little bit of a reprieve, hopefully, so that we can do the things that will start bringing down the deficits and address this issue. The frustration that Republicans have felt is that we didn't get any form of spending cuts or even a plan forward for spending cuts that would address our deficits in exchange for raising the debt ceiling yet again. And that's not what the leader of the free world should be leading to do. We should be showing that we have the capability to do what is right. Here is the problem. 60% of our annual spending in this country is entitlements. That means Congress does nothing on that segment of spending. You can't touch it unless you have entitlement reform. Only entitlement reform is going to get us where we can begin to really see deficit reduction. Because if you've got 40% of the budget, and that includes defense, you can't cut enough from discretionary spending to actually begin to make a real dent in the deficit. So it's entitlement reform. The easiest of those is Social Security. Even if you look at the things the president has said and Republicans have said, they're on the same wavelength on Social Security reform. Everybody knows the actuarial tables are out of whack when people are living and wanting to work into their 70s, and yet you have these retirement ages at 63, 65, 66, and it's just not the way Social Security was originally intended and certainly isn't practical now. So raising the age gradually, the earlier you do it, the easier it will be. So most people agree 3 months a year till you get to probably 69. If you do that, that sets you on a path to making Social Security stable for 75 years. Now, you do need to also adjust the cost of living. And there's a deal to be made there as well. The president has said he thinks chain CPI is a better measure of the cost of living than the COLAs. And so that's not very much of a progress forward, but it is some. So that would help a lot. I suggested that we lower the COLA by 1%, so that when 1% inflation hits, you would start having a COLA, but not until then. The Democrats think that is too stark, but there's a way forward here with these kinds of approaches, and especially because you could even do some means testing on COLAs only, not on the basic Social Security pension. So there is a way to do Social Security reform, which would get that one off the table, and then you could deal with some of the others that are harder, like Medicare. But we've got to face it, and I hope that we have candidates who will talk about this in the presidential election, because I don't think anything is certainly going to happen this year because of 2014, and to get the kinds of reforms that we need between 2014 and 2016 will be hard, although it's not impossible, particularly, I think, if the Senate changes in 2014 after the elections. You might be able to get a credible, say, corporate tax reform. Because here again, if you listen to what the president has said and you listen to what the Republicans have said, they're on the same wavelength. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Every one of you in this room knows that. You're in business, you know that. That is outrageous. The leader of the free world has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. So, President Obama has said he would support a 28%. Representative Camp has said he would support 25%, and Ron Wyden, who is the new chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate, has said he would support 24%. So there's a deal there if we can bring people together and go in the right direction. That would help us immensely with our global competitiveness. But we'll have to see. We're getting into that election season now where it's going to make a big difference what happens. I'll go into a little bit more of that at the end of my talk, and let me know when I'm at the end of my talk. Just to give you a little bit of a overview about what should happen in 2014. But let me talk about the underlying problems. We've got the unemployment rate that is way too high for an economy to be stable and for actually us to have a good number of Americans working. It's way too high, 6 to 8%. It's just too high going in that direction. And so I think the administration is saying, well, why aren't people hiring? Well, they're not hiring, as you would probably know, because we've got so much regulatory burden on top of Obamacare. The regulatory overreach that we are seeing in Washington right now is the highest I have ever seen. Take the SEC, for instance, is on a warpath almost, looking at criminal penalties and trying to be tough, and they got embarrassed in the meltdown, the financial meltdown, but now you've got members of Congress bearing down on the SEC, saying, are you going to be tough enough? Are you going to use your power? And so they are getting tough, that's for sure, but they're also just putting out regulations along with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the new Dodd-Frank overview regulatory agency. And when I talk to my banker friends, they are overwhelmed with the duplication of SEC, CFPB, not to mention the controller and the Fed, who are also competing to show how tough they are. And the regulatory harassment is just getting beyond what is going to make business comfortable to hire and start building our economy in the right way, which is jobs in the private sector, not government. The NLRB, just to give you another example, talk about overreach. Oh my gosh, they've actually, just this week, if you can believe this, I mean, you read the Wall Street Journal, you do believe it. The UAW lost an election in Tennessee in the Nissan plant. Or no, it was the German, the Volkswagen plant. Lost the election, and now the NLRB is actually beginning to look at whether a statement by Senator Bob Corker, who said, I really have a good feeling that if this election fails, that Volkswagen might make another line here and increase jobs, by 600 or something. And now the NLRB is looking at the claim made by the UAW that this is a violation of the Fair Labor Act. I'm not kidding. I mean, thank goodness the Wall Street Journal did an editorial saying, did Senator Corker lose his right to free speech when he became a United States Senator? I mean, my gosh, that is just crazy. It's also crazy that the NLRB actually did say it was a violation of fair labor when the plant, the Boeing plant, decided to leave Washington State and build a plant in Tennessee because it was a right-to-work state. They said that was a violation of the Fair Labor Act. I mean, what is this country coming to that we would have an NLRB that would so overreach its authority? They also passed a rule that it takes more votes to decertify a union than to form one. So if you form a union, it takes a majority of those voting. But to decertify, it takes a majority of the whole workforce. I mean, they're doing this, and so many of the things that you don't even see, like the bills that are passed, the infrastructure bills, the stimulus package, all have Davis-Bacon. Nothing passes Congress without Davis-Bacon. Well, that just raises the costs to every government contract, and you ought to be able to set the bidding process, and you ought to be able to take the lowest bid that is the best. But not with Davis-Bacon, you just equalize and raise the price. That doesn't even talk about the FCC passing an unauthorized rule on net neutrality that says you can't negotiate your internet use. Everybody has to be treated the same. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So one of the things that we've got to be looking at is this regulatory overreach when we're looking at trying to build the economy back. Now, that doesn't even talk about Obamacare. The small businesses, we're seeing people go to 30 hours. We're seeing people, you've seen all of the corporations that are now having a 30-hour workforce so that they don't have the fines. Certainly, if you're not a very large corporation, you're going to have a 50 employee limit and then make subsidiaries that are 50 employees or less so you don't face the fines. Obamacare is, the problem with Obamacare is the prescriptive nature of it. They took companies that had very good plans that didn't meet these specific specifications of the one-size-fits-all government program and said, if you don't fit all of these specifications, then you're going to have to pay the fine anyway. So companies with very good plans, employees who were happy with their plans, did not get to keep their plans, did not keep their doctors. They were, in many instances, thrown out because the company just wasn't going to pay the fines in addition to the costs of a very good plan. Republicans didn't have input on Obamacare. If you remember, not one Republican voted for it in the House or the Senate. So if you don't have any capability to amend it, Nancy Pelosi famously said, well, we'll pass it and then we'll find out what's in it. Well, not exactly the standard you would hope from the United States Congress. So I think that we're looking at a lot of areas that are putting a damper on business, which is affecting all of us and most certainly the people who can't find jobs. I think we're going to have to look at the ways that we can pull back the regulatory overreach. We certainly need to amend Obamacare. There are some good parts of it. We need to look at what works, but the vast majority of it doesn't work, and it has taken away so much of our health care freedom and certainly needs to be turned back. Tax reform is essential. We're now looking with all the surtaxes from Obamacare at basically we're going toward 50% tax rates. Now, especially if you put state and local taxes in, everybody's paying close to 50%. So that's not good for our economy either, and it's certainly not good for hiring new people. So what do we do? Well, first of all, companies are going to have to be active in litigation. Now, I'm sorry, I am a lawyer, and maybe that's a bias, but the problem is you're not going to get any relief from Congress because the Democratic Senate is going to stop anything that would try to stop the regulatory overreach. But the companies that have gone to court, like Verizon, did sue on net neutrality, and they won. I think you're going to have to be more active if you are really aggrieved, like the NLRB decisions, if you're in a company that has labor issues. You're just going to have to be willing to go to court, at least to get a stay, until hopefully we can get a better political environment. Now, talking about the political environment, tax reform is essential. And I think if we can take, if the Republicans can take over the Senate, my bias again, but if we can, maybe we could come together, at least on the corporate tax rate. That would be a step in the right directions. The Democrats don't want to do the corporate tax rate without also doing the individual. Well, they're not going to lower taxes on the individual. That would mean tax increases. And I think the tax increases that have already gone into effect 2 years ago and then in Obamacare on top of that, I think that would really be a mistake for the economy. So hopefully there would be a way forward to at least address the corporate tax rate where we do have some agreement. I think there's some good news, too, in the Senate Finance Committee. The new chairman, because Max Baucus has gone to China, is Ron Wyden. He's much, I think, better in willingness to work with Republicans. He has already introduced a tax reform bill with Senator Sam Coates of Indiana, and I think that it has the beginnings of something that could be formed. If in the House side, Dave Camp is the chairman, he's good. The next chairman of Ways and Means is either going to be Paul Ryan or Kevin Brady, both of whom are very good. And then if you have on the Senate side, it would be Orrin Hatch if the Republicans take over, or Ron Wyden. And I think there is a way that that could be productive, and maybe we could look at tax reform if we could work with the president to go forward on that, which would be helpful in the global economy. Now, let me just go quickly into the 2014 political landscape, and then we'll open it for questions. All of the pundits agree that Republicans will gain in the Senate. There are 3 states that are almost sure, because we have very good quality Republican candidates. They're way ahead in the polls, and the Democrats have retired. So there's not an incumbent Democrat, but it is a Democratic seat that would turn Republican. That would be West Virginia and Montana and South Dakota. Those would be the ones that would be pretty well Republican turnovers. The Republicans need 6 to take over the Senate, 5 to tie. So you've got 3 turnovers there. So you're looking at 1 or 2 possibilities more. The pundits are really looking at Arkansas now, where you do have an incumbent Democrat, and he's running behind in the polls. And the Republican is a congressman, Tom Cotton. And so I think that one is the next one on the list that is considered in the real possibility range. And then you've got several states where it's kind of up in the air. Right now, New Hampshire, interestingly, Jean Shaheen is the incumbent. Scott Brown is the former senator from Massachusetts, but he grew up in New Hampshire and has a house in New Hampshire. He has now registered in New Hampshire, and he polls dead even with her right now. And I think Obamacare will be the big issue in that because it's very unpopular. It's unpopular everywhere, but it is in New Hampshire as well. And Louisiana. Now, Mary Landrieu is very good on oil and gas issues, but she's also was strong for Obamacare. And that one is also in the range of possibility. But boy, on oil and gas, Mary is good, and certainly I think that one could be close. I don't know. The Landrieux generally win in Louisiana, so that one would be one to watch, most certainly. The other ones where Republicans have done well in presidential elections, and for instance, Iowa. Obama won Iowa last time around, but not by much. And Harkin is retiring, and I think that one is a state to watch. The others would be North Carolina, where Kay Hagan is the incumbent, and that is a very red state. Romney carried it heavily. And she is really fighting the Obamacare issue. And a lot depends on who the candidate is on the Republican side, but that one is one to watch. And then Alaska is the other one. Begich is another one who voted for Obamacare, and if the right candidate gets out of the Republican primary, it carried heavily for Romney, so it would be a possibility. So there are several states in play for those other 2 turnover seats. So it'll be really interesting to watch in 2014, because if the Republicans take over, then you might have the opportunity to do some reform, maybe Social Security in entitlement area, and maybe the corporate income tax at least. So I'll stop there, and I know you probably got questions of both speakers or whatever, however you want to do it.